You think you know medieval history. You've seen the castles, the knights, the kings, but what they teach you in school is a sanitized, polished version of the past, scrubbed clean of the brutal, bizarre, and brilliant reality. The truth is far more visceral, a world where survival demanded a kind of pragmatic cleverness we've completely forgotten. Today, we're revealing 5 facts they deliberately hide from the textbooks. These aren't just curiosities, they fundamentally change your understanding of the entire era, exposing a society that was pragmatic, brutal, and shockingly advanced in ways you'd never expect. We start with a simple phrase you've heard your whole life and the terrifying law that created it. The term baker's dozen conjures an image of a generous baker throwing in an extra loaf for free. Think again, this wasn't about generosity, it was about survival, a direct response to a law so severe it could cost a man his hand. In medieval England, the Assize of Bread and Ale was the consumer protection agency of its day, but with corporal punishment. Bakers were legally bound to sell loaves of a specific weight. But here's the insane part. The punishment for short-changing a customer wasn't just a fine, it was public humiliation in the pillory where rotten food would be thrown at you, or worse, the amputation of a hand. God help you if your scales were off by a few ounces. The 13th loaf wasn't a gift, it was the baker's insurance policy. By baking a 13th loaf and including it with every 12, the baker created a buffer. If any of the 12 loaves were slightly underweight, the 13th would bring the total weight safely over the legal requirement, saving him from a life-altering mutilation. This was a society where the stakes for fair trade were literally flesh and bone. It reveals a world not of quaint markets, but of a brutal, pragmatic legal system where a simple transaction could end in a public spectacle of pain. This was commerce governed by fear. Now, from commercial law to something that seems like pure superstition, medieval medicine, we're taught it was all leeches and prayers, but archaeology reveals a shocking truth. They were successfully performing brain surgery. The procedure was called trepanation, drilling or scraping a hole into the human skull, and it worked. Skeletons from medieval burial sites show clear evidence of bone healing around the surgical holes. These people didn't just survive the initial, horrifying operation, they lived for months or years afterward. This wasn't a rare fluke, it was a practiced medical technique. Why would anyone do this, you ask? They were treating severe head injuries, skull fractures, or what they interpreted as demonic possession causing seizures. They understood that pressure inside the skull needed release. The success rate, given the total lack of antiseptics or anesthesia beyond strong ale, is staggering. It forces us to reconsider the medieval mind, not as superstitious simpletons, but as practical problem solvers working with the brutal tools they had. But survival in the Middle Ages wasn't just about surviving surgery, it was about surviving your daily drink. And this brings us to everyone's favourite, the beer-only diet. The idea that everyone drank beer because they preferred it is another comforting myth. The reality is far more desperate. Water in medieval cities was a biological hazard. Rivers were open sewers, and wells were often contaminated. Drinking water was a gamble with dysentery, cholera, and death. But the brewing process, boiling the water, killed the pathogens. Beer was quite simply safe hydration. This wasn't a choice, it was a matter of public health. And before you ask, yes, children drank beer too. They consumed small beer, a brew with such low alcohol content it was negligible, but it was sterile. Imagine an entire society, from childhood to old age, functioning in a state of perpetual, slight intoxication, not for pleasure, but to avoid a painful, shivering death from contaminated water. The medieval world was a place where you had to drink alcohol to stay alive, a visceral reality of survival that textbooks completely ignore. But not everything terrifying was real. The most iconic image of medieval torture, the Iron Maiden, that iron coffin lined with spikes, is a complete fabrication. It was invented in the 19th century. Victorian historians, obsessed with portraying the Middle Ages as a dark age of barbarism, created this device to satisfy their own Gothic fantasies. The real medieval torture was far more creative and psychologically brutal. They preferred methods that prolonged agony and served as public spectacles, like the breaking wheel or drawing and quartering. The Iron Maiden is a lie, but the medieval capacity for horror was very real, and it's preserved in the stories we tell our children. Because the original fairy tales were medieval horror stories, the versions collected by the Brothers Grimm in the 19th century were based on folklore that stretched back centuries, and they are visceral, terrifying warnings from a dangerous world. In the original Little Red Riding Hood, there is no woodcutter. The story ends with the wolf eating the little girl. That's it, she dies. It was a straightforward cautionary tale about the very real danger of wolves and strangers in the woods. Sleeping Beauty's origins are even darker. In the earliest known version, the princess isn't awakened by a kiss. A king finds her unconscious, rapes her, and she awakens later only after giving birth to twins. These weren't stories of romance and rescue, they were stark lessons about the brutal realities of life. Abduction, violence, and death were constant threats. The purpose of these narratives was to instill fear and obedience in children. The world was a place where you could be eaten alive if you strayed from the path, or suffer a terrible fate if you were careless. The happy endings we know today are a modern invention, a sanitization by authors like Disney who stripped away the gritty medieval truth. These original tales reflect the genuine fears of the era, the fear of the forest, the fear of strangers, and the fear of unexplained illnesses that could look like an eternal sleep. They are a window into the medieval psyche, a world where horror was a teaching tool and fairy tales were survival guides. So that's the reality they hide from you. A society governed by laws so brutal an extra loaf of bread was an insurance policy against mutilation, surgeons who successfully operated on the human brain with basic tools, a population that drank beer to avoid waterborne death, and fairy tales that were originally horror stories reflecting a dangerous world. This history is more complex, more visceral, and far more fascinating than any textbook allows. These facts reveal a society that was pragmatic, clever, and brutally honest about the realities of survival. Which fact surprised you the most? The baker's law forged in fear, or the shocking success of medieval brain surgery? Let me know in the comments. The only question now is what other secrets are waiting to be uncovered. Subscribe for more revelations that will completely change how you see the past.